Hello, everyone. Hi, my name's Hayley. I work for the FMB and really pleased to have your company along with us this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. This afternoon, we're joined by Andrew Dixon, who you can see on the screen alongside me, who's an old friend of the FMB and has produced the FMB Guide to Becoming a Small Housing Developer. This was first produced, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, but has recently been refreshed and updated. So Andrew's going to run through why that's been done and how to use this guide in your own business. So we're also joined as well by Chris Carr, who's Managing Director of Carr and Carr Builders and who was National President of the Federation of Master Builders until last September and is himself a developer. So he can give you guidance based on his own experience as well when we get to the Q&A part of the webinar. I should add that the developer guide was sponsored by Openreach and also by United Trust Bank. So we're very grateful to them for their support to help us to produce the guide, which we know will be really valuable for our members. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. If you have a question as we're going through the webinar, hover your mouse at the bottom of the screen, you should be able to see a little chat box or a Q&A box down there. Just pop your questions in there and we'll deal with Andrew and Chris will answer your questions at the end of the session. Presentation will take about 25 minutes or so, and then we'll wrap up in 45 minutes or maybe an hour, depending how many questions you have for our speakers. But first of all, we've got a question for you today. So I am just going to launch a little poll that we'd be grateful if you would complete this. You should see some questions appearing on your screen right now. And we really just want to find out why you've attended today and where you are in terms of development work at the moment. So it's asking whether you're currently doing refurbs and extensions and wanting to get into development, or you're already doing some. You can see the questions on the screen. So I'll keep quiet for a few seconds and give you some time to complete those questions. Right, I think everybody that's going to answer has done so now. So I'll end that poll and just share the results with you on the screen. Hopefully you can see that. Can you see those answers as well, Andrew? Yeah.
I
So
can,
that's
Haley. Yeah, and that's really useful to see.
yeah. So it looks like most people are already doing small scale developments and new builds as a contractor looking to get into developing more in their own right. So yeah, thank you very much for that, everybody. I'll close that now and I'll hand over to Andrew to start the presentation. Thanks, Andrew.
Okay, thanks, Haley. I'll just start by uh, bringing up the slideshow, and hopefully this is going to work. There we go. So, hi everybody. I'm
Perfect.
Andrew. Great to be here this afternoon. I'm really looking forward to this webinar and the questions and thoughts to follow. Um, Here's what I'm going to run through this afternoon. I'm going to start off with quickly explaining the purpose of this guide. Then I'm going to talk through some key points in the main sections of the report. I'm going to start by talking about what we've described as the fundamentals of development, so land, finance, and planning, and then look at some key elements in the construction and sales phases, and end by touching on some other key considerations and focusing on smart construction or modern methods. And you'll see there's a lot in this guide, and I think there's a danger in this webinar of skipping too lightly over everything. So in the time we've got, I'm going to focus in more detail on those key issues of land, finance, and planning. And then in later sections, just pick up some key considerations and issues which I think it would be most useful to take on board. So in terms of the purpose of this guide, the guide is intended to be a source of support and guidance for all those considering or in the process of becoming small developers. What it does is to provide an overview, essentially, of the key steps you'll need to take and the key issues you'll need to consider. But I think most importantly, it brings together a lot of tips and advice from experienced people in the industry. What it's not intended to be, I think it's worth saying, is a kind of comprehensive guide or some kind of technical manual. On the contrary, it's intended to be relatively easy to pick up and just read. And then where it needs to, it signposts you to further information. And in terms of and who the guide is for, well, the guide and this webinar is aimed essentially at prospective small developers, those exploring the idea of moving into the housing development business. So first-time developers or very recent startups. And by the sounds of the result of the poll, it sounds like that's the type of audience that we're speaking to today. So that's good. And when writing the guide and thinking about who would be reading it, I guess we were thinking of two typical types of backgrounds people might be coming from. One of those is those already in the construction industry, and I think that's mainly people here today would fall into that category. So small builders and contractors, skilled tradespeople, perhaps people who effectively know a lot about how to build quality homes and want to bring that knowledge into the housing development game. And the other is people who might be seeking to bring professional skills from business or highly relevant expertise in, say, planning or finance, bring those to bear in housing development. Um, so let's get into some of those key issues that I talked about now. And let's start with land first. And this is sometimes one of the hardest parts of the puzzle for small developers and house builders. Small scale developers, by the nature of what they're doing, are looking for quite small sites. For those bringing forward their first or second developments, this will probably mean somewhere between 1 and 5 units, and a site that would suit that. The guide sets out some of the key means and the sources of intelligence that as you might say, that small developers use for finding those types of sites. And you can see these here on the left-hand side. I'm not going to go through all those in detail today, but I'm going to focus on some key pieces of advice on the right, which relate to them. Because I think depending on where you are in the country, finding suitable sites of the right size, especially those that have got a good chance of getting planning, can be a real challenge. Because of this, one of the most important considerations for startup small developers is, number one on this list, whether to buy a site or part of a site that already has planning permission. That's a typical entry point for many small developers. This means you'll pay more, you'll get a lower return, but you'll reduce your risks, reduce the time and complexity of the process while you build up your experience. So there's a rationale, a reason why you might want to consider that. Second key piece of advice: estate agents are a key source of knowledge about potential sites. And the key tip here is to find and register with some good local agents and look especially for those who have worked successfully with other small developers and know your market best. The other key pieces of advice on this list are ones that experienced developers often wanted to get across and something they tended to stress time and time again. And that was, before you make any decisions on a site, you need to know and fully understand the site that you're looking at. So this certainly means undertaking some basic groundwork investigations. It also means checking that there are no issues such as contaminated soil, unstable ground, etc., that could potentially threaten the viability of a scheme and lose you a lot of money. It means working with architects and planners to understand design or planning challenges that a site might present as well. And it also means understanding the market. And that means the market for the types of homes you're considering building in the precise location you're considering building them, and getting this wrong, building the wrong types of homes in the wrong location, and more generally not fully understanding the site you're looking at, can be a trap which first-time developers fall into, and one which can ultimately sink a scheme. So one way of thinking about this is three basic questions you need to answer in assessing a site. And they are, can you sell in this location? How likely are you to get planning? And can you viably build on this site? And in terms of the time and cost involved in answering those questions, that's probably the order in which you want to consider them as well. So we can move on now to the next fundamental, which is finance. And again, this can often be a significant challenge for small developers and those entering the industry. We could run a whole seminar probably, or a whole course on development finance, but by way of a quick introduction, here are some key things that someone with no previous experience of looking for development finance needs to be aware of and consider. So, looking at this list on the left-hand side, so firstly, most lenders won't lend the whole cost of the development. They'll not generally say, here's 100% of the finance you need for this project. Different types of lenders will be prepared to lend higher or lower percentages of the cost, but generally, the higher the percentage, the higher the leverage, the higher the cost of borrowing will be. So a project will normally be funded from a combination of different sources, what is sometimes called a capital stack. And you can see an example of this in the diagram on the right-hand side. And this will normally include a first charge lender who'll take the first claim on the site if anything goes wrong. It includes the developer's equity and normally an intermediate source of finance as well. And sometimes lenders will want the developer themselves to have sufficient capital at risk. Sorry, I mean, always developers will want, always lenders will want developers to have sufficient capital at risk. That's sometimes called having skin in the game. So, and the idea behind this is that you're fully incentivized to see the project through to success. So, in the same vein as well, unfortunately, it's often relatively normal for lenders to seek extra security in the form of personal guarantees, and sometimes the lower the personal equity that you as the developer are putting into the project, the more likely that is. And then finally, as it says here in the final bullet on the left, lenders will only lend once planning permission is in place. No one will lend to purchase land without planning permission. It's too risky. And they will only lend once they think a scheme is fully funded. So they must be able to see you've got the funds to see the whole of the scheme through. It's also useful to understand, I think, just what lenders will be looking at when they judge whether they want to finance your scheme. And United Trust Bank, who were one of the sponsors of the guide, kindly shared with us this three-step process that they go through. And that those three steps are, the first thing they're looking at is you, the developer. What's your track record in delivering similar type projects? That's difficult. It can be difficult if you're a first-time developer, but if you are a first-time developer, then they'll be looking for clear evidence of transferable skills. So if you're a contractor with experience of building quality homes, that's a transferable skill. But then you will also need to show that you've brought in robust planning and sales skills, and other relevant types of skills where you may be less able to show that experience. Secondly, they're looking at the asset. Can the project be built and can it be sold? So your costings and the type of assessment that you should have already undertaken on the site. They'll want some solid evidence of this, facts and figures. Do your build costs look realistic, etc. And finally, the finance structure. As we've touched upon before, given the cost of buying, building, and selling these homes, does the capital stack ensure that the scheme can fully fund itself from start to completion? So the guide lists and describes different types of lenders, everyone from high street banks to crowdfunding, and you can see these listed on the left here. Alongside this, there's some clear advice within the guide to bear in mind on some of the key sources of finance mentioned, and I'm going to touch on some of the key points here. Firstly, be prepared to look beyond your high street banks. High street banks have traditionally been a source of funding for smaller house builders. The bank that had your business account and knew your business best would often be the provider to support you to grow. That's much less the case now. High street banks don't tend to have a big appetite for small scale development finance. It might be worth making an application, but don't be too surprised if it's a no ultimately. Beyond high street banks, however, there's now quite a healthy ecosystem of different lenders. These include smaller, more specialist and challenger banks, and I'm thinking of the likes of United Trust Bank, but there are others as well. And they provide similar sort of debt finance to high street banks, but they have a stronger appetite for and also stronger expertise in smaller scale development finance. Because of this, they might be slightly more expensive, but not excessively. Beyond these, there are a wide range of different lenders, sometimes talked about by some in the industry in terms of tiers, so tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, etc. Though not everyone likes these terms. What this is describing is essentially a kind of sliding scale of lenders who are defined by how prepared they are to take on higher risk, whether that means lending much higher percentages or lending to those with no or much less track record. But they take on these risks by charging successively higher fees and higher rates of interest and putting in place more onerous terms. And on that note, the second kind of key piece of advice here is to read in detail what those terms are. You need to understand the model that a lender is working to and the terms this can involve. Understand the total cost of the finance, not just the headline interest rate. And above all, you also need to be clear about what your financial exit strategy is if it is the case that things don't entirely go to plan. Third key piece of advice, not surprisingly, find a good broker. In helping to find that right source and right type of finance for you, in helping to navigate all of this, a good finance broker can be really valuable. Although interestingly, a developer recently said to me that actually intelligent use of AI may now be able to do a lot of the work, perhaps not all, but a lot of the work that brokers have traditionally undertaken. So that's worth bearing in mind as well. And finally, private equity can play an important role in financing small housing development. Housing development can provide a nice rate of return for private individuals who have the money to invest and are happy to take on that higher risk. And you may well be able to find those people through your broker or through your personal contacts or your wider business networks. So that's finance. Moving on then to the next fundamental of development, planning. And planning can be one of those other really big challenges for small developers. The length of time, sometimes the complexity of the planning process can often seem disproportionate for small scale developments. One way of getting around this, as we've already touched upon, is to look for so-called oven-ready sites which already have permission. Even then, though, that there will almost certainly be some remaining planning hurdles which will need to be negotiated. But for most established developers, planning is a necessary hurdle. It's a risk factor they have to learn to negotiate and a system they have to learn to become familiar with. The guide provides a kind of general overview of the planning system that's helpfully useful. And you can see here a basic flow chart of the planning application process for a small housing development. I'm not going to go into this in detail today. You can find it in the guide. And one point to make here is that you don't need to know everything. That's what the professionals advising you, in this case, your planning consultant, are there for. But knowing how to approach a planning system, understanding the decisions you will need to make, that's the key. So I wanted in this section just to pick out a few key pieces of advice on different stages in the planning applications process. And in this, I'm going to focus on the early stages to begin with, beginning with when you're just exploring the possibility of a site and an application. So this post-it note here on the left-hand side. And the advice here is firstly, get a good architect and a planning consultant. No surprise, that's one of the most important pieces of advice that experienced developers wanted to put across. Finding a good architect, a good planning consultant, getting them involved as early as possible, especially as a first-time developer, having good advice is going to be key. Secondly, you don't need to know everything, but do some homework. A number of small developers we spoke to talked about researching other similar applications to understand what was being accepted, what was being rejected, and why. So all local authorities now have databases of planning applications online, which you can search through at your leisure. At the same time, you'll begin to develop an understanding of local policies as you do that. And this links with that first piece of advice as well, because in the course of researching other applications, you can spot local planning agents, local architects with a track record of success. Then moving on to what's called the pre-application stage. So this post-it note here on the right-hand side. And pre-application discussions are paid for but informal discussions with planning officers about a possible application for a site. The main piece of advice here really is just to hold fire on making too many decisions about a site before you've had a first pre-app meeting. And there's a lot of reasons why these pre-apps, as they're called, are important. But one key one is that before you've had these discussions, you don't really know how planning officers are going to approach a site, what they might be looking for or not want on a particular site. So there's a danger in going too far down the road in the design and the application process before that pre-app. Secondly, build constructive relationships with planners. One other really commonly related piece of advice was to build good working relationships with planning officers. Relationships between planners and any developer can too often become confrontational, but particularly as a small and new developer, that will rarely go well for you. That said, and it says this in the guide, that there's a balance here, and you should feel able to politely challenge and question and push back on decisions or requests that you don't think are fully justified or necessary. And then finally, looking at the application stage, three key pieces of advice here. One, get your paperwork right. This is something that planning officers we spoke to were particularly keen to point out. They often see applications from small developers that fail this test. And again, this is something that a good planning consultant should have covered, but you need to be clear about precisely the information you need to provide and encourage your consultant to be clear and concise in the information that they're providing. Inaccurate information or large amounts of irrelevant material will tend to just slow down processes and decisions. Secondly, be prepared for delays. And this was a point that experienced developers were at pains to get across. Planning processes normally take significantly longer than they're meant to on paper. And it's important as a new developer that you're prepared for this and you've built in some kind of leeway in your calculations in terms of your projected timelines, your costs, your cash flow. You need to be taking account of that possibility of delay. And the final piece of advice, be prepared to compromise. In the course of discussions you have with planners, be prepared to compromise on the details of the scheme to help you get that decision that ultimately you need. So that's the fundamentals. And the middle section of the guide deals with various aspects of what you might describe as post-planning phases. So everything from workforce and skills to buying materials, building control, site management, warranties, all the way to handover and sales. As I said at the beginning, it doesn't make sense to touch on all of this today or to try to touch on all of it. And we know from the poll, most of you have a solid construction background. So I'm going to pass over those areas likely to be more familiar to you and pick out quickly some of the key pieces of advice on assembling a core team in particular, and on the sales and handover stage, which may be a bit less familiar. In the guide, there's information about on-site team, accreditation, skills and training. Some of this information is probably aimed more at those from a non-construction background, but I think three key pieces of advice here that are worth picking out are the following. One, think about assembling your professional core team as early as possible. This has come up a few times in different ways already, but whatever your background, you're going to need to rely on a core team of those with the right professional skill sets to give you the advice you need to successfully navigate the development process. This is a team game ultimately. That core team, as it's been described here, will include a bare minimum, a designer, whether that's an architect or architectural technician, planning consultant, and an estate agent. You may well also need a specialist property solicitor, surveyor, structural surveyor, though these may come at the recommendation of your designer. And you should be thinking about assembling this core team as early as possible. In a way, this is one of the key things you should be doing early on in that development journey. Second key piece of advice here shouldn't come as a surprise either, but it's worth putting in the time to find quality tradespeople. If you want your business to succeed and gain that reputation for quality, you'll need to work with tradespeople you can rely on to consistently deliver that high quality work. And finally, the approach to the on-site workforce that you take and your relationship with them will likely depend on your professional, your industry background. But if you're a tradesperson or someone who already works as a small builder, contractor, or small developer, then you may already have an on-site team or a set of working relationships that you can bring. But you'll need to concentrate then on finding those skills in the housing market, in planning, in finance. But then whatever your professional background, partnerships can make a lot of sense in terms of drawing into the business skills and expertise that you might have less sight of. So Then let's come to the end of the process, as it were, and the sales, marketing, and handover side of things. And the guide talks through some different sales and marketing techniques, which you can see here in the box on the right, on the left-hand side. Sorry, on the right-hand side, all of which you might choose to use in different ways. I'm not going to run through all of these, but as you can see from that list, technology has provided a whole range of increasingly important ways of marketing and selling. So from 3D visualizations, which one developer who told me, one developer I talked to told me about how drone shots and aerial videos of a site had proved a particularly effective way of engaging customers. Lots of things to think about there. What I want to do here again is just to pick up some key considerations that you'll need to think through. And I was going to say at this stage, but in actual fact, you'll need to think them through well in advance of the sales stage. So the first of these is will you sell off plan? In other words, selling before you start building. Selling off plan means faster returns and lower risks, but if house prices rise fast or build costs increase significantly, then this can significantly cut your returns. Selling off plan may also require different sales and marketing approach, and that needs to be weighed up as well. Secondly, you'll also need to, when you're setting up your site and scheduling the build stage, you'll need to think about the customer's experience of the site when they visit. So at what stage of the build will you be when you're showing your customers around, and how will the site look at that point? Because that's an important element of your marketing that you need to think about. Thirdly, who sells? Is the person best able to sell your product you, or is it a trusted member of your team or a local agent with years of experience? There's not really a kind of a right or wrong answer to this. Even if you've never sold before, you might be the most passionate, the most persuasive person to sell the home that you've built, or you may not, and professional expertise may be what you really need. You'll need to make that judgment. And then in the handover stage, how can you ensure the best possible experience for your customers, whether that's through regular check-ins or an extra special handover pack? For instance, one developer talked about including vouchers for local shops, information on local services, all as part of a more personalized service. And as a smaller developer, that customer service may be a key element of your competitiveness. It's a level of service that larger developers may be less able or less inclined to deliver. But when you're building at a smaller scale, you're unlikely to be able to compete on price with those larger developers. So that quality, that customer service may be absolutely key to your competitiveness and your business's reputation. And alongside all these other issues, the guide also provides an overview of some other key issues and possibilities which small developers might need to consider. And these include things like sustainability and the custom build model. But I'm going to finish by quickly focusing on modern methods and digitization and some of the key things you might want to consider in relation to these. And I think it's useful to start by clarifying what we're talking about on this. So there's a quote here on the left. Smart construction is a phrase that's sometimes used to describe building design, construction, and operation processes that make use of digital technologies and industrialized manufacturing techniques. And none of these types of solutions, I think it's worth saying, none of these types of solutions or processes are necessarily better or best. Traditionally built homes are still the preference of many house builders and their customers. But the point is here, it always makes sense to understand your options. And that's one key piece of advice that came through in this, which is really to try to fully understand the whole range of potential solutions that are on offer here. And in doing that, you should feel like you can engage directly with manufacturers to get that better understanding of what's out there, what might be available to you. And what is out there as well, it's worth being aware of, incorporates much more than just modular build or structural assembly. So solutions like subassembly, using pre-assembled components or kind of cut to measure traditional materials. All these things mean there's now a wide range of options that you could potentially use to increase your efficiency, whether that's by reducing time spent on site, reducing labor costs, or any other factor. And what makes sense for you will depend on your business model, the type of product that you're wanting to build, and the type of market that you're selling into. And in making these decisions, there are some possible advantages and possible disadvantages that you'll want to consider. And we've set some of these out briefly here. I'll quickly go through them, but some of the possible advantages might be financing. So solutions which make that build stage, that build phase shorter and simpler, should reduce the cost of financing a scheme, should allow you a slightly faster return on investment and the ability then to move more quickly on to the next project. Better quality assurance, higher technical performance, and transfer of responsibility for structural soundness and thermal efficiency to a third party. These can be advantages as well. Probably less exposed to skill shortages, probably experience less waste on site. Some of the possible disadvantages, on the other hand, might be your upfront costs might be higher. There can be risk from components being damaged in transit, and lender hesitancy. So some lenders may be more hesitant about these solutions because of unfamiliarity or because of their perceptions of risk. So these are the kind of questions that you'll want to consider. But that's really just a whistle-stop tour, essentially, of some of the key elements of housing development and some of the key tips and advice from others in the industry that are contained within the guide. From those who many of were exactly in the same place that many of you are now and have gone on over the years to become successful small house builders and developers. So that brings the presentation to a close, but I'm going to hand over to Chris now to add any further thoughts and comments, and we can pick up on anybody's questions as well.
Yeah. Can I just add as well, if anybody does have any questions, please pop them in the chat box or the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, on the basis that there is no such thing as a daft question. So please go ahead and do that whilst Chris is speaking as well. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Hayley. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I mean, Andrew's done a great job of showing exactly what this book was about. The guide was really put together by developers, small and micro developers from all over the country, and it's their thoughts, their opinions. Andrew did a fantastic job bringing them all together. But this isn't a policy paper. This is a guide from developers for developers. But although that's what it's intended for, there's been a big push for the public sector to look at it. So we've had a lot of inquiries from planners, from elected members. MPs have taken a look at this because they need to know what we struggle with and what our issues are as an SME builder. But there are other things as well. I mean, Andrew's touched on a lot of the issues we've got, but there are issues coming forward that we need to be mindful of. Materials, which we talked about. The issue with materials at the moment because of the Ukraine war was bad enough, but now we've got in the Middle East, the material costs are going to go up. And availability is going to become a bit of a problem. I mean, I don't know if you're aware that I think it's like 2/3 of our cement now comes from Turkey and Morocco. And no brainwave to say that cement will be diverted to other countries when they start rebuilding. So just being aware of the materials and keeping an eye on it. And if there's materials you can stock on site and you can afford to do it, we've taken bricks and blocks and held them on site to avoid the shortages. Future Home Standards, I think most people have heard of it now. It's due to be released a year ago and Christmas, and it's now been told it's another few days and it'll be released. And the Future Home Standards is a completely different way of building properties. The energy efficiency, we thought the FLO and S building regs was quite severe. This is a whole new way of building new homes with the thermal envelope. So, but we're all going through the same thing, and what I have done with representing the FMB is managed to get the SMEs and the micro developers to have a lead into this rather than being hit us all the way straight away. And this was for the main reason of materials. If we were all going on air source heat pumps and then suddenly all the volume house builders decide to buy up all the air source heat pumps, then we would be in trouble because you're only as good as your weakest link. The government understood that, and to be fair, they said there'd be a run into it. Doesn't mean you can't do it earlier, and we're just doing 2 full electric houses now. But it means we can gradually go into it, and that gives the manufacturers time to ramp up the delivery of the materials. I mean, Andrew touched on MMC. There are 7 levels of modern methods of construction, and it seems like quite daunting. I would guarantee you every one of you is using level 1. Truss roofs, engineered joists, floor beams, staircases, if you have staircases manufactured off site, that's level 1 MMC. So it's not as daunting as it sounds. And level 7 goes to the whole modular. Basically, you get your houses delivered on a lorry and it's dropped off on an oversight. But there's a big spread in between there. So if you get challenged by your local authority to look at MMC, and it sometimes can be used as a tool to bat you on planning, just say, yeah, we use it. Don't tell them what you're doing. We did it with our local authority on some land that they'd got Homes England funding on, and they had to prove MMC. We said, yeah, we can do that. And we just built the same houses we've always been building. One of the things on the radar at the moment is water security. It's not come out yet, but will come out in the next year, 18 months or 2 years. And unfortunately, again, working with the FMB, I get to sit on these panels and these groups before the policy becomes out to the builders. So they are worried about our water security and scarcity. So we might find that within a few years, we're all using rainwater harvesting systems on new properties. Sounds very daunting, quite expensive. But if you're on a development of probably 10 or 15 or above, where you have a balancing pond, you might be able to reduce the size of your balancing pond by keeping the water on site on your individual plot. So if you reduce the size of your balancing pond, you could get an extra plot that actually covers the cost of the additional thing. So it's just been aware of it. PV, which is the Future Home Standards on the new building regs, there is going to be a new PV policy for your panels, and they're going to look at both sides of the roof potentially, which is, I won't say crazy, but it's I'm not sure how efficient that's going to be. So the biggie, it'll be on roof space, and it will be on the floor space of your property, and there'll be a calculation to work that out. We have a problem because we build bungalows, which has got a massive floor space. So it'd mean massive PV, but there is a limit. So they will put a cap on it. But just be wary again. We may have to change the designs of roofs to take dormers off, build in Velux windows or the likes to build in integral with the PV panels. But with the dormers, you've got to cast a shadow and it takes up a lot of room. So those sort of things may change. Finance, Andrew's used. We spoke about United Trust Bank, Close Brothers. Homes England, which is the government's kind of almost housing bank, is one that everyone's veered against, and I don't know why. And they have got better. You do have to jump through a lot of hurdles to get your first finance, but it's government money, it's your money, it's taxpayers' money. So they are making sure you're basically a fit and proper person or a fit and proper company before they lend you it. Which, if it was my money, I'd be doing the same. But it's only the same as the second and third tier banking system. So it's the same again. But when you get the first development site through, the funding becomes loads easier because they knew he was a developer and they're willing to lend more. And the other thing with Homes England, they'll also become a second charge. So they realise that some of the first charge companies, maybe your High Street Bank or maybe even Close Brothers or United Trust Bank, but you're still going to be short, they will come and take a second charge. So that gives you more money for development. They realise that it's so expensive for the SMEs and micros and the new entrants to the market that they are trying to help in that way. But I suppose the biggest one we all know about is skills. We're really struggling as an industry for skills. With the Future Home Standards and with the new ways of building, it won't be just new entrants to the market, it'll be upskilling your existing workforce. We're working very closely with the government again, through the FMB and partners such as MKM Builders Merchants and the CITB to find a system where we can look at upskilling our existing trades out of the classroom. So looking at maybe doing either webinars or doing day things to builders merchants or manufacturers and learning how to upskill. So that'd be quite an interesting project. And the only thing I say is a personal thing is if you are successful, and I'm sure we all will be, the FMB has got a great tradition of delivering fantastic developers as well as as construction workers. And we've got to remember that the FMB, 20% of our membership all build houses. So it's not quite a unique thing as we think of the FMB. About 20% build houses, whether it's 1 or 2 a year, or some of our top ones are building 200 or 300 a year. So we've got that base there. We know what we're doing with it. But if you make money at it, try and reinvest it. On a contracting side, it's always quite handy that if you've got money in the bank, you'll want to physically spend it yourselves. Try and reinvest in more land. You'll never go wrong with investing in more land. And when it comes to borrowing at a later stage, you can borrow against the existing land you've got. So it's a bit of a different mentality to contractors, where if you earn the money, you will spend it. And we've been contractors in our time. This one, every bit of money we get back into more land, back into more land. It gives you that safety net and also something to borrow against. So that's my to Pennyth with. If there are any questions, it'd be great to ask Andrew or myself.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Really useful experience there shared with our members. On the subject of making money out of the projects, Nigel has asked what would be a typical margin for a developer to expect to get back to cover, in return for covering their risk. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's one of the things that we get challenged on when we become a developer. We have to do social housing on site, and where I'm based in Grimsby, and we have 20%. So 20% of our new developments have to have social housing. You can negotiate that down if you don't make a profit. So what they're saying is about 20% they will accept as being a profit for a developer. It takes a while to get up to that, and we're very fortunate. We've had land in the a fourth generation, so we've had land in the business that my granddad built. So we can never contest commercial viability, but they will accept a 20%. So if you go between 15 and 20, I think you're doing very well. At the moment, you may be down to 10 or 12. The government don't like earning too much money. They complain that it's we're earning too much profit, and that's why we have these taxes against the social housing, highways, education. But it's the high risk, and the government are well aware of that. Your speculative builders, it's fairly high risk. So 20%, Hayley.
Okay, thanks.
Is it also the case, Chris, that traditionally lenders have been kind of unwilling to lend unless you're making in that kind of 15 to 20% bracket because of those risks? They almost demand that.
Yeah, I mean, what it is they always say is the only thing you can bring down to get to that percentage is land price. So it's going back to, if you've got an option on somebody, you go back and say, you wanted, 200,000 an acre. You got to go back and say, my bank's insisting on this kind of thing. I can offer you 170, 180, because of, 180. I think we'd all snap it at that price. But that sort of thing is, you can go back, and that's where they say the land value. You've got land value of farmland is about 10 to 12,000 an acre. I think paddock land's about 12,000 an acre. So you uplift it to 200,000 an acre. The government and everyone says that's where the profit is. So it's not really for the developer. You go back to the landowner and say, you need to be more sensible with your price. We all know that's a difficult thing. The landowner will say, I'm not going to sell. It is difficult, but it's there's a lot to think about when you're doing that, Andrew.
I was wondering, when Andrew was presenting the part about lending and your sort of stack of different lenders to finance a project, do any lenders, thinking of the Dragon's Den type model where they're putting in a share of the money to finance the project, do they also give commercial advice on things like profit margins and those other aspects? Do they do that for small developers?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone's lending the money, they want to help you as much as possible. At the end of the day, A, they don't want to lose the money, but B, they want you to have the biggest return going. You'll find actually another one that we don't talk about for finance is if you're a part of a quite a large accountancy business where you're having your books done, ask them for a private wealth department, because you'll find a lot of local people who know you or know your company will say, actually, that we're about 100 years old. If we would go back and say, we've got this piece of land, we're looking for funding on it, they go, well, actually, it's fairly safe. I'm getting, 3 or 4% in the bank. I might get 8 or 9% by doing this. And it's amazing how many locally where we are, where it's private individuals funding small developers, either as a joint venture doing a profit share or just lending the money at, 7 or 8% to get a better return. So always ask your accountant if there is that possibility. There's a lot of high-end wealth earners in most towns that are looking for a higher return than they get from the bank.
Yeah. Great. We've got a question from Peter. So he's asking about the best way to look for land if you've never done it before. So do either of you have any tips about if you're starting out on your own developments, like if you were starting out right now, Chris, where would you start looking for plots of land to develop? I know you did talk about this a bit, Andrew, in the presentation, didn't you?
Yeah, local knowledge is really good. Your local authority will have a land bank somewhere. They'll have a list of assets and land they own. It's amazing when you go to your local authority. Oh, we've got this land. We don't know what to do with it. Well, even if you do a joint venture with the local authority and don't pay for it till you've developed it, or you just buy it outright. Homes England have a list of land. Predominantly, it was larger pieces of land, so RAF bases and prisons and things like, or large chunks of land. We've now got Homes England to actually break them down into smaller parcels. If you're based in London, you've got a TfL. They have land around. It's local knowledge. Try and speak to people. Look at, if you're in a rural area, look at exception sites. So look at a village that hasn't got a planning permission on it, and just say, go to the parish council and say, we're actually looking. Do you know the landowners? And we're looking to sustainably build in that village. So we're looking whether it's either affordable homes for starter homes or bungalows for people to move out of the 4 beds into a bungalow to release the houses for things. So just ask around, ask the agents. Estate agents are always good, but everyone asks estate agents. Just make yourself a little bit different and look around. And even as a volume house builder, which people don't realise, that if it's what they call a strategic site in a town, the strategic site should have an element of custom build or self-built plots. That's usually a specification. What they do, they'll agree it with the local authority at, say, 5% will be put for custom and self-build, which is basically just building the properties. What they tend to do then is not advertise them for sale and then go back to the local authority in a year's time and say, oh, we can't get rid of them. Can we have it as our normal site? The council traditionally go, well, yeah, if nobody wants them. Never check. So actually ask your local authority on any strategic site, have you got any custom and self-build plots? Now, that's a good one to start with, because what you have there is fully serviced plots. You have the roads in, the drains in, all the services, gas, electric and water that you'd have to pay a connection charge to. But actually, you pay a bit more for it. But you've got a ready-made site with outline application, just put and some of them have a design guide. We've just done a 30-unit site of custom and self-build properties. And with that, we put a design guide with it, so you can build anything you want, from a 2-bed bungalow to a 6-7-bed detached house. But you've got to use a class of materials. You've got to have it's quite a contemporary design. That helps as well, because that gives you the flexibility, but also gives you the certainty of and the less risk as well.
That sounds like a really good idea, Chris. I'm aware of a site here in York where I live, where they release a certain number of plots for self-build, and there doesn't seem to have been any sort of design guide on that, because there's no coherence to the properties that have been built on that site. They're all very different, and it looks a bit of a jumbled up mess, if I'm honest.
We put a design guide, try and keep the street scene looking
exactly
right.
that.
Nobody wants to be on we haven't got a thatched cottage next to a contemporary plot. They're all contemporary, using a certain render, 2 colours of render, 2 colours of bricks. You can choose the window heights are all the same size and everything. If you can go with that sort of thing, it's a lot easier.
Looks better, yeah. Andrew, did you have anything to add on that point?
I think Chris has probably covered nearly all the bases there, if not all of them. The only thing I was going to add was sometimes, local plans can contain quite a lot of information about sites, local land availability assessment. So what they call, what they refer to as SHLARS, that stands for Strategic Housing Land Availability Assessment. So this is a process that local authorities go through every few years of kind of identifying suitable land for new development. Probably they're not touching on the very smallest sites, so probably anything less than about 1/4 of a hectare might not appear in these, but they're probably worth having a look at. The brownfield registers as well. I'm not sure how live they are these days, but all local authorities in England are or used to be required to maintain a register of brownfield land, and they might be worth looking at as well. Again, the very smallest sites might not be included, but again, it's about building up the biggest picture and making the use of as many different sources of information as you can.
There used to be a scheme, didn't there, for like remediating brownfield sites if they were contaminated or they needed any work done prior to building work happening, but I really don't know whether that still exists or not.
You've got to be careful with brownfield sites at the moment because the government got the policy on a biodiversity net gain, and a greenfield site, a ploughed up field, has no biodiversity. So by increasing it by 10%, which is the government's targets, it's quite easy. Put a balancing pond in, a few suds, planting scheme, you covered it. In fact, you'll sell credits. A brownfield site with Buddleia and all the, an old building on there, it becomes very difficult. And we've been lobbying the government, well, I've been doing it 9 years, to say that they should scrap BNG on brownfield sites. There is no reason to put it on there at all. We can't deliver it, and all you'll end up doing is building all over the greenfield. And I've got a site now which was a 9-acre brownfield site. I've just had to turn it into BNG credits. So instead of building on it, I've just turned what is a brick pit, left it full of water, and then selling the credits at 150,000 a credit. It's just stupid. Why have I got to leave a brownfield site and build on greenfield? But so just be careful with brownfield when you go in the BNG credits on it.
Am I right though, Chris? They've announced recently, I don't think it's come into effect yet, but they've announced recently that for the smallest sites, so for those less than 10 units, they are going to scrap that biodiversity net gain.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Right. Okay. We've got one more question here from Nick. He's asking about the planning process and whether the FMB's published any guidance on conversion of commercial to residential properties and planning and permitted development. In other words, what you can and can't do under permitted development and what the process is. I don't think we have got any guidance on that at the moment. I don't know if you've got anything to add, either of you, on that question.
Not that I'm aware of.
It's very popular and the government like it, so they're trying to incentivize commercial to residential. Unfortunately, I live on a seaside at Cleethorpes and Grimsby, so we have the issue with flood risks on some of the low-level stuff. But no, the government are actually trying to encourage that. You have the issues, conversion is noise, transfer of noise, transfer of fire. There's all those issues. We did a thing for the FMB and for the House of Lords on conversions of properties, and it became, they didn't understand that you have to fireproof, soundproof. All of these things come to an additional cost. But yeah, it's very, it's a very good thing to do, especially in the big cities, your Londons, Liverpool's, Manchester's, and Birmingham's to a certain extent. They're very active on that.
Okay, thank you. Patrick has asked, what are the rules on CILS, CILS? Does anybody know about that?
Yeah, construction industry. No,
community infrastructure levy.
That's the one. Yeah. Some local authorities have it, some don't. It's a Section 106. We have just Section 106. We're proud to say we're such a poor area in Grimsby and Cleethorpes that they can't tax us anymore, so they just do our 106 and don't have CIL. You can challenge CIL, it's just an additional tax. What they are talking about, we're talking about CIL and additional taxes, is they're talking about putting a charge for the building safety levy, which hasn't come about yet, and I think there's been a big pushback. But that would be the working out square meterage of your property and then charging you a set fee for that square meter of your property, and building control would collect that money and they won't give you a completion certificate until you get it. So that's another additional to the CIL and to Section 106s. But CIL you can challenge to a certain extent. It's all about this commercial viability. If you can go back and say, with the CIL costs, your 106 costs and your infrastructure levy, this is not commercially viable, and you show them that it's in the single digits, then you can push back on it. Especially, seems to be bizarrely, it's social housing you push back on rather than education or anything else. They'd rather take a cut on social housing than anything else. But it's just to challenge it, you'll need a consultant. It's quite a complex procedure.
Yeah.
So all I can add to that is that it's a per square meter charge. That's the main difference between Section 106 and the CIL is the CIL is per square meter. So there's a kind of set. Each local authority will set their per square meter levy charge, and then it's just calculated automatically. And there are processes for challenging it, but you probably got, I think it's fair to say, Chris, you've probably got more flexibility on the 106.
Yeah, CIL you can challenge, because sometimes local authorities ask for a CIL contribution but they've got to prove what it's for. So if they want a swimming pool or they want an ice rink or they want something, that's what it pays for, this infrastructure, a bus depot. Hey, they've got to prove that they can deliver it and at what cost. So you can ask him for the money, and that's the trouble with developers. We go, okay, we'll pay it. You can challenge them and say, well, what's the cost for? Can you explain it? Can you tell me when you're going to deliver it? One thing, my friend's a lead at a council for planning. He says, trouble with developers, you never challenge us on anything. We tell you something and you agree to it. And I don't know if that was just have a go at me, but it's true. Sometimes we don't want to fall out with them. But like we said in the booklet, you can challenge, do it nicely in a good way, but you can challenge anything really, whether it's design, whether it's numbers on a site, whether it is SIL or 106. You can say, no, can you just explain why I need to do this? And you can tell me where the SIL money's going. There are opportunities if you do it in a nice way.
I suppose this comes back to the point Andrew was making in the presentation about the importance of having a good team around you. Because if you've got a planning consultant who's got good local knowledge and connections into the authorities, they'll be able to advise you on that kind of thing. Absolutely. I would think.
They can, but you've got to remember that you've got to make this personalised as well. If you want to have a long-term relationship, the good thing about if you use a local planning consultant, he won't want to fall out with a local authority because he's got a vested interest. You bring people from away, and sometimes they'll go, okay, we'll bring someone from Leeds to do it. You find it just gets their backs up straight away, and they won't. You've got to negotiate some of these sort of things. So if you can negotiate in a fair way and explain, if you've got the reasons why it kind of won't work, then have a consultant by all means, but don't be afraid to chip in as well.
So we're coming up to the hour mark now. I'm just going to throw in a quick question of my own because I'd really like to know what you guys think about this, which is that there are planning reforms coming in this year, aren't there? I think I'm right in saying. And do you anticipate that very much is going to change with the planning process? Is it going to become more streamlined and quicker after this year's changes, or is that anybody's guess?
It won't change. Planning is all about communication. Bringing other planners in isn't going to be the solution to this. And we've said to the government before, you've got probably a good third of the planning departments in the UK doing really well and get rated very highly. Your 2/3 are doing poorly. By throwing money at them, that's not the problem. What you need to do is change the mentality and change the way they do it. We've suggested a 3 strikes that you're out. If you're poor performing, you're told to improve. Secondly, if you don't improve, you get someone parachuted in from a successful planning authority to help you change the way you deliver it. And third, scrap your planning policy and you can actually have private sector take over. Our local authority had a private sector company running it for 10 years. Best thing we ever did. So the reforms, and I've challenged this again with the groups I sit on, that it's about improving what you've got there now, not trying to bring new people. There's not 200 planners out of work, so how they're going to change it? And it takes ages to bring a planner on. The guidance is, if you've got a negative attitude, whatever guidance you get will be negative. If you've got a positive attitude, whatever the guidance is they'll look at the positive way of doing it. So it's changing the mentality of planners rather than changing planners or changing the system. The planning policy is actually not much of an issue. It's how it's delivered at a grassroots level where we're dealing with it.
Okay. Anything to add, Andrew, before we finish?
I'm not sure I dare add much to that.
Great. Well, so we've had good attendance at the webinar. This obviously shows that this is a topic that our members are interested in and looking for guidance on. So just to say to everybody attending before we close, we will be sending out a follow-up email, which will have the link so that you can download the copy of the guide for yourself, and any other contact details or anything that we want to put in there for you. And it'll also have the link to the recording of the webinar, so you could watch it again or share it with others if you want to. I would also say one of the slides that Andrew shared was about the importance of digital communications and promoting your homes when it comes to the point of selling them. Last week we did a webinar with FMB Associates, the digital department, which was all about how to make an attractive website, how to use social media to promote yourself in your local area. And so if anybody's thinking about that side of things, looking at last week's webinar, which is still on the website, be a really useful thing to do. And I think we'll leave it there. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much to Andrew and to Chris. That was really clear. Lots of useful tips and information for members in that webinar today, and it'll be available on the website for other members to look at in the future. So yeah, I will close the webinar down now, and thank you very much for attending, and thank you for presenting, Andrew and Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care.